it's like off the top, over the top in terms of being visionary and thinking about big things that have to be done. So I guess there's nothing further that I need to say. There's no events coming up that I know of. The only thing I'll say now is, while I agree with his analysis of what's wrong, and what we need, and with about half of the solutions, there are a few of the things I don't quite agree with, and so I think I'm going to do a presentation next time, and another look at the same idea and how we might deal with our transportation stuff. Another way, part of it, because you'll see he has this very interesting plan for urban core kind of transit, which I've been completely on board with, and so the good stuff to talk about. So without further ado, Sam Lott, who's been doing this how long?
Yes, we transportation. 35 years.
Yeah, a long time. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. The response that David indicated, he's got different ideas on some things. It's exactly what this presentation is for. It's to start or continue or maybe take to another level the dialogue about what we're facing. There's no secret that Houston is in an incredible growth spurt. Just a couple of things. Most interesting, in the last couple of years, we've moved up to the 4th largest GDP region in the nation. I'm supposed to stand still.
General area.
Okay. So what are the implications of that? Well, I heard the other day somebody said 12 million in the next 20, 25 years. It's the $10 to $12 million 10 to 12 million people question that we're dealing with. We have a very dense urban core. The suburban ring is growing, which is an area that David is anxious about. I know he'll have ideas to talk about that. The largest concentration of employment has been and will continue to be in the urban core. We are doing things that are important, and I am not here to say that any of the things we're pursuing, whether that's metro, TxDOT, any of those are the wrong thing to do. We have to do them all. The question is it enough? And so I've kind of tongue-in-cheek taken on this mantle of a prophet, saying that there are other things we need to be doing to prepare for what's coming. This is my daughter, Sharon. Sharon works at McLean Gallery in the sales group and is an adjunct professor of art at the Houston Community College. So as we talk about this matter of a crisis in transportation, if you're not hard at the solutions that have to be on the ground 20 years from now, you are way behind the curve. So that's the issue. If we do not make sufficient provisions, decisions now and provisions for what needs to be there in the next 20 years, then we have a more serious problem. There's two dimensions that I want to talk to you about. One is our freeways and city streets, and the other is our railroads. There's some missing elements I'm going to describe, and I'll get into these in more detail, certainly, but for now I'll just mention commuter rail system. We've talked about it for years. Many times, even in this room, I think we've talked about it. As well as some type of a grade-separated transit system. First, let me talk about our streets. We have a wonderful street and freeway system. When I came here 35 years ago, in 6 weeks I knew how to get all over town because I knew the freeway system, although not all of it was built at that time. But it was a wonderful thing. But we're very familiar, if you ever go on Transtar, this is actually not too bad a day, I just picked a day, where we are starting to see evidence of what I call operational failure. The red, although it's keyed on the Transtar graphs to operating speed, it's another type of indication of what traffic engineers call level of service F, the red, which is an operational failure condition. You're still moving, but it's in an operational failure mode. Here's our challenge. We are constrained in our hub and spoke freeway system, as wonderful as it is, by the fact that we have to go through a whole series of interchanges. It's the interchange where you have practical constraints to how much capacity you can put through the system. And we have many interchanges in close proximity. The other thing is that as we are growing, as the forecasts show, the travel times, this is taken from a study that was done by my company for the City of Houston, and it was using H-GAC's conventional travel demand model, even with what I think are some limitations of a demand model to operational conditions as bad as we're going to see. It even predicted that the average daily time to commute to work, based on the assumptions of where people will live and where they're going to work, is going to grow from 50 minutes to 175 minutes. Now that's a number that is not uncommon in places like New York City and Los Angeles. And so we have to look at these other big cities of the world to begin to understand how we make provisions for people to move around. The other interesting thing is that right in the middle of this most capacity constrained area, we have our 4 biggest employment centers. And of the 4 that are shown there, they're within a 4-mile radius. If each of them were classified as a central business district, they would all be in the list of the top 15 largest central business districts in the country. And we have 4 of them within a 4-mile radius, in the middle of a capacity-constrained system. As a result, what we see today in operational failure for peak hours is going to be with us in the urban core all day long in the next 20 to 25 years. David had done some interesting types of presentations on the 2035 forecast showing employment density, and I asked him if I could use that. And as you can see, the 4 largest urban districts have dramatically more employment than the other areas. Now, the 2040 is now, the data's coming online. I don't have one of these graphs yet. It's probably going to show up here in Conroe with the campus that's being built, Exxon campus that's being built. You'll see something significant up there, but it's not going to change the fact that the largest concentration of employment between these 4 urban districts in particular will continue to be right in the middle of the urban core, the problem area. And then employment, or rather, we know that residential population is going to be increasing dramatically in the urban core as well. That's a good thing. We like it. I have lived inside the loop for all 35 years. I hope to continue to live there. But as we deal with this issue of growth and what's the implications of that, as freeways congest, one of the issues is more and more people are going to start bailing off to go the arterial streets. When I go see my sons in LA, they've already told me all the tricks about how to get to the airport from Hollywood area where they live without getting on the freeway. And so you make those decisions as you're faced with insurmountable congestion on the freeway. Even so, our street grid is not really designed for the type of arterial flow overall that we may need to, or hope that it would have. So here's another forecast. Now, a demand to capacity number, like you see on the bottom, is what comes out of the H-GAC travel demand model. And basically what it's saying is that on Westheimer in 2035, 60% more people and cars will have a desire to use Westheimer than it is theoretically possible for Westheimer to provide for. And the importance of these numbers, of which throughout the freeway system and many of the arterial streets is forecast for numbers like this, it means that it's impossible to move that much traffic through the street system. So the traffic either stacks back in congestion queues, which causes it to last all day long, or it begins to divert to other places. We have a wonderful plan for a high-capacity transit system that runs on the ground, and I am fully in favor of this. This graphic came out of one of David's preparations, and I think it's a wonderful explanation of how all the communities in the urban core are going to be connected together. I can't wait, because I live in one of the communities. I could walk to one of those stations. The issue is when transit runs on the ground and is interacting with traffic, is that what works well today in the off-peak, even in our today peak hour, in some places does not work well when all these modes come together. And the problem is that's going to be more and more the case throughout the urban core, not just in the middle of Texas Medical Center. So our crisis is that we cannot build enough capacity. TxDOT is reaching the limit of what they can do. They're now at a point where it's going to be a challenge just to maintain the capacity we've got. But they're reaching the end of what they can build as they've been hard at it for the last 10 or 15 years. More traffic will move to city streets, and the congestion on the freeways, as depicted in that area along West Loop, is going to last all day long. The other issue is that the light rail and bus system, as important as it is, and as we need to build it, it's not in itself going to be able to provide the necessary capacity that we need. The last mile circulation in particular, as we talk about high capacity transit carrying people from where they live to where they work, is going to become more and more of an issue. And there's a danger that these 4 largest employment districts will become more and more disconnected and inaccessible. We cannot risk our urban centers in the urban core becoming less and less viable as the heart of the engine that drives Houston, even as we build more and more employment around the edges, the suburban edges. So we have a key gap. How do we move people over large distances? The forecast is, not that, I know David doesn't necessarily agree with this, but the forecast is that more of the next 4 to 5 or 6 million people that move to Houston in the next 25 years will live in the suburban ring because they can afford to live out there than will live in the urban core. That's debatable. What often happens in cities like LA is that when you change your job, you often move out of necessity, even if you're living in the same town, because of the travel. And that's probably going to be true as well. But there's some pieces that are missing. So if we look at other cities of the world, what can we learn? One of the things that's missing, although we've talked a lot about it, had some very good studies, I would say, even though I'm biased, we're missing a piece called long-distance commuter rail. And basically, we've had these studies that's been given consideration in a variety of contexts of H-GAC studies, but there has reached continually a problem. We're at an impasse with the Class 1 railroads who own the track and own the right-of-way. With the capacity of or the constraints with capacity, there is not a practical way to put passenger trains in the mix. So that brings us to the second dimension of the crisis, and that's our railroads. This is not the freeway system, this is the railroad system. It looks like the freeway system. When Houston was first founded, one of its mottos was the place where 17 railroads meet the sea. We have a wonderful network. Now some of these, such as the one along Katy Freeway, is underneath the concrete because it was sold and used for right-of-way for Katy Freeway. West Park doesn't have tracks on it, but at least the right-of-way is still contiguous and it's owned by Metro. But these others are, in fact, active freight rail lines by and large. Here's an example of the problem. The terminal subdivision. This is actually part of Union Pacific's main line to the west coast. And it goes a block from my house through Bel Air. It goes through Memorial. It runs parallel generally to Washington Avenue. It splits into what's called a passenger main and a freight main, even though they put freight trains through both several times during the day. The average travel speed on the terminal subdivision for freight trains is less than 10 miles an hour. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because of these yards up here, and they're maneuvering trains into and out of the yards. So even though it's the main line and double track, very fine facility, this is a few blocks from my house. I still standing on Bel Air Boulevard when I took this picture. They have trains parked there continuously. On this particular day, there were 2 trains. The whole main line was blocked for several hours. And one of them wasn't even a Union Pacific train because they were maneuvering and trying to move trains in and out of the yards. And so there's a matter of operational philosophy as well as capacity. They move slowly through the network as they process in and out of the processing yards and to and from the plants along the coast. There are numerous grade crossings, And this operational paradigm of holding trains on the main line just makes it impossible to say they could move passenger trains. Grade separations cause a continual conflict. This is my daily experience as I go to and from the grocery store. I was coming from the grocery store, so I took this picture as I waited. Greater fluidity is needed. We have an issue in meeting the capacity needs of the freight rail system that need to be considered along with our freeway and railway system. And in fact, you've heard about the growth in container traffic. As they expand soon in a few months, they'll have new capacity, bigger ships through the Panama Canal, more container load coming to the Port of Houston. In addition to that, you've also heard about the tremendous spike in moving both crude oil and oil for refined products by train in and out of Houston. That really wasn't expected until the last year. All of this will place tremendous pressure on our freight rail system, which is critical to our economy. One of the ways that moving people is used almost uniformly in major cities of the world, and I picked a few, is what's the classic commuter rail. It's often bi-level cars pulled by a locomotive. Often it's electric, sometimes it's diesel electric. This one's in LA. New York has many of these systems pulling people in and out of Manhattan every day. This is a 4-car train. You can run 8 or 10-car trains and have as many as 1,200 people in seated comfort, a key point, traveling long distances over extended periods of time, and that's the way they go to and from work every day. In addition to that, a lot of the world is looking at grade separation, particularly in their dense urban cores for circulation. This one happens to be in China, but you can see it's elevated above the city streets. And so grade separated transit is becoming the common way to move people in the urban core. And when you grade separate, then you can apply advanced technology that I've worked in most of my career, where the trains are fully automated. So let's talk about the missing pieces. Here we have 3 missing elements that are we've talked about them a lot, we've considered them, we've had studies, but they're not a hard part of the intent for this region. I'm going to talk about each one of them, so I won't dwell here. Step 1. If we could build a high-capacity freight corridor system that was sealed in the sense of it crosses no roads, it's a semi-protected area, at least it's fenced, and now there's ways to monitor rights-of-way for intruders or any type of person entering the guideway. If we could build such a corridor-protected system that would connect all the main access rail lines through our region, then we would be able to move freight trains unimpeded at relatively high speeds. Now, to do that, you need to include a paradigm shift in the operating mode. It's not the way they run the railroad today, but if you were to create, through such a corridor system, strategic locations where you could hold trains for periods of time, and then at the processing yards you would have a dedicated area that's a dispatch and receiving yard, as we do in transit, then you would be able to keep trains moving at high speeds and create a much greater capacity than exists today on our freight rail system. And this is an example of a study that's about to start by the rail district called the Fort Bend Bypass. I think Judge Abear may have originally proposed it some years ago, and we're going to look at how to connect the BNSF, the UP, and the Kansas City Southern tracks that approach from the west through a less populated part of the county, and connecting back into a portion of the rail network that already has a number of grade separations. And the rail district is about to start some engineering studies to add 6 more grade separations and be very far along in creating such a sealed corridor concept already. And so if strategically we could locate these processing yards that are simply to make trains keep trains off the main line until they can enter the yards or reach their client destination, we would have a tremendously different system. This would be state-of-the-art for freight rail operations. If we did that, then we would be able to come back and say, all right, now we have the opportunity during the peak rush hours to run passenger trains. This was a study that I was part of. David was on the steering committee some years back. This was a preferred set of routes that there were 5 lines of the many that were studied. And we looked at creating at least we had a glimpse into what it might be to create such a system. That system, by the way, with all 5 lines, with a complete set of rolling stock and major new stations going all the way to downtown and serving urban core, was estimated at $3 billion. Point of reference. Commuter rail is fundamental to how we begin to provide alternative to the freeway. If we were to create such a system, we would do it in cooperation with the Class 1 railroads. They would probably still own the track, and they would move freight trains in off-peak times through those same tracks that go by my house. But during the peak hours, we would be able to run trains like this. This one's in Minneapolis. It's different than the light rail system. It's different than many of the conventional mass transit that you would see, such as in the middle of Paris, because it moves people over long distances in seated comfort, and there are very infrequent station stops. This is a comparison between urban rail, a suburban application of light rail, maybe going out to the edge of Harris County, and long distance. And so stations would only be every 5 to 10 miles. And you would be able to make the trip in a very efficient time, probably better than you would ever do on the freeway. And it would be like clockwork every day. You would know exactly how long it would take you, which is the other problem with the roadway system. But this is the classic use of commuter rail. In Paris, for example, this is served by the Paris Metro, which you may not know, but most of those lines are rubber-tired lines. They're in an initiative to automate it. I think I have a slide later on that, so I won't talk anymore. But this would be the equivalent of the RER that brings people long distances into the center of Paris. In the study we did several years ago, we looked at how you might serve a major commuter rail system. This on the right was a facility that I did studies of in the 90s. This is Los Angeles Union Passenger Terminal, as it's called, or Union Station, as most people refer to it. There are commuter rail trains and Amtrak trains that go up and down the West Coast and bring people as much as 100 miles on the Metrolink trains into the heart of LA. And then there's a subway system that connects that rail yard over to the center of town and on into Hollywood. And if we were to find a place where the rail network would best connect in the center of town for a terminal operation station like this, we believe that it's located along the West Loop. This is the Hempstead Highway, this is I-10, this is Post Oak. And it ties in very well. In fact, it's a better configuration than they've got at LA, who they wish they had double-ended the station rather than cut it off of the freeway. In LA, another example of key infrastructure is that they have a maintenance and storage facility about 2 miles from Union Station along the river corridor. Well, we have a somewhat underutilized, it's only used generally, they park gravel trains there and stuff, called Eureka Yard, that's 2 miles from this proposed site. Something like that would be necessary if we were going to implement a regional commuter rail system, with many trains coming inbound in the morning and many trains going outbound in the evening. Here's a photograph of the site. TxDOT's already bought half of it. They've torn down this half over here because they're expanding the interchange. I did my best at the time to say, while you're at it, it makes a lot of sense to buy the other half. They didn't do it. Perfect example why the crisis I'm talking about must have foresight and provision. If we wait too much longer, these warehouses are going to be replaced by high-rise office buildings, and then it will be too late. So a simple, relatively speaking, a simple step now by governmental agencies to protect this area for the future need is the type of action that I'm describing will lead to a mitigation of the crisis we're facing. So the last step. grade separated transit circulator systems. I'm biased. I've worked in this field of automation, which has to be grade separated, my whole career. Here's two examples you're probably familiar with. This one's in downtown Miami. It's been there for 20 years. It's a circulator system that runs through downtown and connects the financial district and the Omni district into downtown. People transfer to this system off of the regional rail system. At Government Station is one of the main areas where they just a vertical transfer down an escalator and you're on the platform to board this system. The stations are very compact because with automation you can run short trains on very close headways. So the station infrastructure is compact and it fits well into the urban fabric. This is another technology. It's a linear induction motor, a limb-propelled rail car that connects Kennedy Airport to Jamaica Station in Queens. But this is rubber tired, this is steel wheeled, both fully automated. They're good examples of the technology I have in mind. In an urban district, as you have all of these modes connecting in around the edge of that district, as well as driving and parking, a circulation system that works in concert with other transit, such as urban rail, would allow that last mile connection to occur very quickly and easily. People in Miami arrive on a train from 20 miles away and they're at their office in 5 more minutes on the Miami Metro Mover, as it's called, and it's very efficient. We studied that for Texas Medical Center some years back, but it didn't go past just almost the bubble diagram stage. We looked at how you might connect the Texas Medical Center campuses, including the developing new South Campus, down with Reliance Center. There's a Union Pacific rail line down here where a lot of people think a commuter rail station would work very well. There's actually another opportunity up here. Rice University and the museum and park area up here. If you were to create a circulator system to connect all that together, then you would have a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And if you were to do that using technology like this, does anybody know where that is? You can see it's at the treetop level. This is in Singapore. This is a Mitsubishi car that is on a circulator system connecting this urban district to a rail station. I was standing on the edge of the rail station, actually, as they then take what happens to be a fully automated subway into downtown. Automation is taking the world by storm. In this country, we've regulated it to airports. It's an airport people mover. Works great. The rest of the world is using the same technologies to build full metro systems. And this is showing you the number of places around the world. And there are a few in the U.S. that are shown, like that one I was mentioning, even though it only goes 4 or 5 miles off the airport, they're including it because it's not just on the airport property. But most of these are the regional scale systems. Paris Metro, this is line 1. That tells you how old it is. They have just completed full automation. And they're planning a 200-kilometer ring, fully automated, that will ring Paris, probably around the Périphérique or somewhere like that. Another example in France, which they've used automation for years, is in a very small town named Rennes, where the whole metropolitan area is only 400,000 people, but they have a fully automated transit system. Portions of it are aerial, so I used examples of the very aesthetic guideway, as the French always do, and portions of it are underground. So if we took this concept and we applied it in the urban districts where you have conceivably large numbers of people coming on big trains, then you would create a way for them to get the last mile from their train that came from wherever, Conroe, for example, or Waller, or College Station, to their office destination using these circulation systems. And then, as we looked at this graphic, we said, well, why not put in an express connection so that if you left your office in downtown and wanted to get to the Galleria area for a meeting, you could do that in 15 minutes. That can't happen on ground level transit, especially with the type of congestion we're looking at. So grade separation would allow you to do that. And the other observation by a senior planner here in town, she looked at that and she said, you've created a single unified central business district. And that is, in fact, the way Manhattan works. You get on the subway if you want to go from uptown to downtown or to midtown, and you get there efficiently. So we would have, I believe, the equivalent. I haven't tried to compile numbers, but I believe we would have the economic engine equivalent of Manhattan if this system were built. Now it is supplementary to and supported by the ground level transit that I'm saying needs to be built as well. But this is the next step to provide connectivity. And in fact, as the point was made in my progressive thought, is that if we could build a regional commuter rail system, we would have to have a way to get them efficiently from the intermodal stations, as are illustrated here, to their final destination. Completely separate talk I did last week to the Rail District Board, based on some studies we did for TxDOT on high-speed rail, took a first glimpse at an intermodal station. And in fact, I only assumed 2 commuter rail lines coming into a downtown station as part of that. And the bus system was so taxed to try and say it was delivering people into downtown consistently that you had buses running, I think it was every 45 seconds, you had a downtown circulator bus arriving at the station, and people were still, in certain times of day, that got off of these big commuter rail trains, having to wait multiple buses before they could get on. And that was just with 2 commuter rail lines. What if we had 5 commuter rail lines running? That's the reason why we've got to think about this. There are other aspects of automation. I'm going to wrap it up quick and not talk about the freight as much as this other small car system. This is kind of the new rage in transit, at least among those of us in automation. We're really interested in this small car concept. And this is basically, I consider it a last quarter-mile system. In more moderate temperatures, we might say, as I would love to say, well, why don't you walk that last half mile, get some exercise? Well, certain times of the year, like this time of year, that would be fantastic. But in the middle of summer, when I'm in coat and tie, and I'm going to a meeting, and I want to arrive not drenched in sweat, that last half mile walk might be something that is not practical. Systems like this can then take, this is illustrating the bubble diagram of that larger circulator system of trains, and this is showing how you might have a network to connect the museum and Herman Park area with Rice University and over to Rice Village. This little vehicle is running now at Heathrow Airport. It's one of the first and best demonstrations of this technology. For 30 years, it's been dreamed of by planners. It's now becoming coming into reality. The popular term now is called Automated Transit Network, ATN. Probably because the old name for 30 years, called Personal Rapid Transit, has been beat so much by the classical transit engineers that it's better to have a new term. So we're calling it Automated Transit Network, ATNs. There's actually 3 manufacturers with products on the market and systems installed carrying people, and more coming on fast. So this is a technology application that is very interesting. Conceptually, if Sharon and I were going to a meeting, we would go to the station, we'd tell a kiosk at the station where I want to go, a car would arrive, we would get in, just the 2 of us, and we would go, and it would not stop till it gets to the destination station, because all stations are offline. There's also the opportunity to move freight on automated systems. It's been done multiple times over the last 20 years, and it would basically mean you take a technology that might be designed for carrying passengers, you reconfigure the vehicle to be such that it could carry containers. And here's a concept of where that freight corridor system I described, if you put in processing yards for intermodal yards out here in Fort Bend County, which UP owns a couple thousand acres, Kansas City Southern already has one, and tied it together with an automated system to the container yards, you might take a whole bunch of trucks off of the freeway in the process. This is being considered in other places like Los Angeles as well. So I have 3 minutes to wrap it up, and then we can talk. Existing conditions. We're reaching failure conditions already on our roadways. and we're only half the size of a region as we will be in 25 years from now. We're going to see congestion like we see today all day long. The realities in places like New York and Los Angeles. The railroads are congested and at their operational capacity. We really need to help find a way as a community to move freight in and out of town better than the way that was designed literally 100 years ago. But it's not in the business model and no incentive for the Class I railroads to do that. They can make it work the way it is. And then we have, as a result, insufficient capacity, the gaps I've described. So, if these are the missing elements, and with certain pieces like the commuter rail, you have to have other infrastructure parts that are major in their importance, then we have to be planning ahead. What are we lacking? I think we're lacking a shared vision. Everyone has good ideas, but there tends to be my idea will work just fine, we don't need your idea. And my message is, we're going to have to do more with all the ideas to deal with what's coming. And that, as a result, will mean we have to deal with cost. We have an endeavor that I've described here, and back of the envelope based on several studies that have been done and then double the cost. I think it's a $30 billion investment to build what I've described for you here today. And I think that's an investment that is the lowest hanging fruit for us to begin to plan for today. Will it be all we need 50 years from now? Of course not. But I think it will provide a platform that we can build from. And it's on the order of an endeavor to what we did when we decided as a community that we were going to build the ship channel and the Port of Houston. And that's the type of project initiative that we as a community need to think about. There will be funding available, certainly, not as much from the federal government. So that means we'll have to come up with more of it ourselves. Not a fun topic right now. And there will be essential public-private partnerships because, for example, the Class I railroads own the tracks. And there's no reason to believe they won't own the tracks in the future. We may have to build public rail infrastructure to create some of this system in order to have a cooperative agreement to use portions of their system for public need. Next step, the rail district has no funding. Did you know that? The Gulf Coast Rail District has no funding. Maureen Crocker, the executive director, is an employee of the city of Houston. Their board is volunteer. The projects that they are doing are because other agencies have given them money to conduct their studies. That's all a good start, but we have to find a way to fund the rail district. The rail district needs to take action on such a high-capacity corridor system. They are also the entity that has been commissioned by the state to deal with commuter rail, and we need to start securing right-of-way and land for provisions of these systems in the future. In our urban districts, we need to begin planning how to and where we might put guideway structures when we're able to build them. So that's the idea I bring. It's not the only idea. It's not an idea that won't work or that will work without all the other supporting things that are going on, and it's not the ultimate answer. But it's the next piece, I believe, that we could accomplish with the most cost-effective investments right now. David, did you want to follow up with any of your slides?
I was going to show a few slides, but I'm going to save them for next time.
Okay.
We'll do some more on the same topic, and rather than taking away from what you've done. So the only thing, the point I guess I would make is that while I completely agree with the sort of magic of this urban core you're describing, and it's really something. I mean, we all know it's, and I kind of hoped it would be happening with the light rail, the problems there, is that we've been looking at the top 25 job centers. And so when you do that, you begin to see job centers that are almost as big and will maybe be bigger than, say, the medical center or Greenway and so forth over time. There's 7 or 8 of those. And so the system that I see there is big enough for one thing.
And I don't disagree with that.
And then I've been been surprised at two separate meetings and then your comment about where people have asked me about this ExxonMobil thing as being, the next big center. So I looked at that, and of the top 25 centers we have, it's not even anywhere near the list. It's 10,000 jobs, and the number 25 is the corner of South Rice and Bissonnette, where there's 16,000 jobs. So it's not in the game. Now, it might be in the future.
Right.
The Woodlands is just barely in the game, but it's in the game.
Right.
So who knows? But that's all I'm saying. So we've got to think about, I think, a bigger system that we're talking about, which is not an argument. Let's do that.
Well, let me key off of that.
Let me one more thing, and then note that I was I may have these numbers wrong. When you say $30 billion, and it sounds like the moon. Right now we have State Highway 99, 290, and getting ready to do 45, and 288, all amounting to around $23 billion. So we can do that kind of stuff every year.
It's not insurmountable.
Sounds like the old Illinois politics was saying a billion here, a billion.
Pretty soon you're talking
We're talking
about
about real money. Every year.
In the hallway, Clark Martinson and I were talking about the part of town we live in, which is along Katy Freeway outside the Beltway, the energy corridor. That's where my office is. And he's head of the management district out there. I think I could add a slide that just to extend the idea that this grade separated high capacity transit technology like the Paris Metro runs, the vehicles are about the size of the ones I was showing you examples of. The corridor that does not have any rail infrastructure is Katy Corridor. So a system like that, using the same technology, could then be extended along Katy, and you could put in circulation functions at the heart of the energy corridor, where from my office I can see 4 or 5 skyrise cranes going up with buildings, and the traffic in the peak hour is already so bad it takes me 15 minutes to get on the freeway, when it used to take 5. And so that's an example of how you take the idea of a circulator last mile system and for applications in corridors like the rest of the region is doing, and take the technology to the next level. And so there may be multiple places over the years that that same concept could be applied. Tom?
There's been some press in the past few days about TxDOT looking at the downtown post office site as a transportation hub. I'm wondering if you see that as an alternative to the Northwest Transit Center hub or a supplement to that? And also, with the Northwest Transit hub, how would you see the Eureka Yard being functional?
Okay. I'm going to answer that from my systems engineering perspective. And I understand we're dealing with the urban place that we all live. But I'm stepping back from my backyard, which is right on some of this, and giving you an answer of what I think functionally needs to occur. I think the downtown station site, I gave a presentation to the rail district, that may be what you're referring to from the TxDOT study. That would be a very fine intermodal facility, but it's configured, would have to work as what you would call an online station. It's not a terminal. It would be difficult to make it a terminal because these trains come in from 100 miles away, and typically when they reach the platform, they might be held there for 15 or 20 minutes because they're going from there to the yard. So it's a terminal operation. That won't work well if you have a facility that's not in a situation where there's another train coming in right behind it and needs to use that 1 or 2 tracks that are dedicated to commuter. So I think it would be difficult to make the downtown station a terminal. I think we have to find another operational hub, as I call it. And that's why the location on the near west side looks like it would work very well. I think we're going to have to find something like that somewhere. What was the other part of the question?
How does the
Eureka Yard.
figure into that?
Okay. There certainly will be maintenance facilities at many of the ends of line where trains might stay overnight. But there also needs to be a place in the middle of town where as trains come in, and they then are taken out of service and have to go somewhere for a period of hours before they're dispatched again. And that's the function that the Metrolink yard has on the river corridor. It's the function that could work very well. I think the size is sufficient in Eureka yard. So it would be a yard much like you see around the world at some point where trains go and take a nap.
So it would not necessarily be a through yard because the eastbound exit is gone from that.
It is
yard.
gone. I think we had an opportunity a few years to maybe look at an option for that, but I think that option's probably gone with the development. But I think it would work very well. That's coming in and out from the west. So that's a good point.
Just to add something there, Robert Eccles, who runs the, what do they call it now, Texas Lone Star High Speed
Texas
Railroad.
Central Railway.
Anyway, said this week that he's very non-committal about everything, so he just tosses stuff off, except that it will be, that train, by the way, will be in operation 2021. And that it will probably, as he looks at it now, have the station in the post office area.
The post office site was studied in the TxDOT high-speed rail study because a panel of representatives from local agencies said that's where we want you to study. So that's where it was assumed that high-speed rail would go. That's still in play, and the private company that says they're going to pay for it probably has a say in that. But you got to connect to it somehow, wherever it goes. Yes, sir.
The picture you showed of Paris Metro, and it mentioned something about walls or something. What exactly is the function of that?
For most automated systems, and the French have been particularly insistent on this, and they've got a lot of experience with it. For automated systems, more and more of them are being built with what are called platform edge partitions and doors. That was the wonder of what they did to convert to full automation. While they were literally every day carrying 750,000 people on that one line, they converted to automation by a technique of bringing in and mounting those partition walls. And then one day they turn the switch, and as the train pulls in, it docks with those doors, and they open simultaneously with the train doors. That's the way most automated systems have been built around the world. There are a few without platform edge partitions, and they try and detect down on below the platform if something falls in. But the French maintain that they want platform edge, and I think
That's a safety factor.
I think it's a safety factor. They have so many suicides, or have had in the past in Paris. I think they're trying to solve that problem. Yes, sir.
Do you foresee, assuming you're compliant with completely, do you foresee the highways being clogged like you described anyway? Like, in other words, 610, as you said, will be pretty much all day is rush hour kind of situation.
All right, let me speak to that, and let me bring in something that I didn't put in this. This is a more simple presentation than I've used with some for technical things, and I'll make reference to it while I address your question. When we spoke recently with some senior officials at TxDOT, they said, well, what we hope is that the new automated vehicle technology that's going to be coming online will help solve these problems. Well, the field I've worked in for 35 years is automation of transportation. And I know the euphoria that comes and the wonderful visions that can occur, and then the hard reality plays out as to what you can do and when you can do it and how long it will take to get it done. Automated vehicles and that technology that's epitomized by the Google car, which I have a slide in one of the presentations that I got a ride in at one of the conferences I went to on automated vehicle systems, is going to dramatically change our world. We're going to be much safer. We're going to have ways to compress vehicles closer together and provide more capacity. But we're also going to have, and I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime, but starting last summer, as I began to attend technical conferences on this topic, I changed my mind. In my lifetime, if I live another 20 years, we will have conditions where I'm driving down the street, or you're driving down the street, and next to you will be a robot vehicle with nobody in it. Might be a personal car of somebody that's being sent somewhere. Here's the fact that we're just getting our mind around this, and most people are not really engaging it yet. If I can take my car to work, or it takes me to work, and then I send it home for my wife to use shopping, and I don't need an extra car, for my one-person trip, I've now created 2 vehicle trips. So our forecasts today of traffic have no consideration of all the empty vehicles that are going to be flying around town and creating more cars on the road. Now that's a practical consideration when you say, but isn't it going to be solved by automation? I did operational studies under that TxDOT study where I looked at the congestion queuing and how it builds and dissipates through the whole regional freeway system every hour of the day using the H-GAC travel demand forecasts, but looking at it in an operational sense. And yes, the West Loop was congested all day long. And even so, because of automation, I increased the capacity of what we would consider practical today by 40% higher. And even so, the congestion lasted all day long. So I think that's going to be a reality, even with technology, even with adding these new systems. Now, in the study we did of commuter rail several years back, we did a forecast using the H-GAC model of ridership for those 5 commuter rail lines. And it forecasted 40,000 riders a day. However, back at that time, 5 or 6 years ago, they hadn't adjusted the model to have $4 gasoline and to have the assumption that you're going to have better connectivity to the stations. So when Alan Clark, the head of the transportation group here at the EBO, who himself was a modeler, after we did our study, he took the initiative and went back and had his modelers rerun the model with more appropriate parameters for today's world. It came out with 90,000 riders a day. And it didn't even have some of the connectivity of what I was describing. So I think commuter rail, 100,000 riders a day is a practical number. Maybe twice that if it's as bad as I'm saying on the freeways. And that's the type of number that would make a dent, but it's not going to take away the congestion. What it would mean is that if I choose to live further out from town, and on any given day it may take me between an hour and 3 hours to get to work, depending on what's happening on the freeway, but I want to know that I can leave my house, drive to a rail station, board a train like clockwork at 8 minutes after the hour, and 45 minutes later I'm in a downtown station where I can get on a circulator system and be in my office 5 minutes later. In that same 1 hour, that's my best travel time on the roadways, I could be at the office every day like clockwork. And that's what the big cities of the world offer people. That's where we need to be planning to go. Yes, sir.
I want to talk about the funding a little bit more.
Okay.
You know, the federal government now is, transit is not very popular there. It's, they're having a hard time just getting highway funding, much less find money for transit. Amtrak fights for survival at every budget session. The Texas delegation wouldn't support spending $30 billion in Houston by any means for transit.
Well, but if they have a compelling case, they might think more about it. But as things stand today, you're right.
Yeah, they're fighting. They fought Metro for years, so I'm not sure that they would support that. But anyway, so the federal government really isn't going to be very much help. TxDOT is looking to convert roads in South Texas back to gravel because they can't afford to maintain them, so they don't have any money.
Right.
Metro has managed to lose the last bond election to get them more money because they couldn't manage to grow ridership in a bustling city like Houston, so they're blocked from any major spending on transit the next, 10 or 15 years.
Right.
I just wonder if it's time to start looking at a regional transit authority, roll Metro into it, maybe the rail district into it, and get a broader perspective on transit. But the issue there is whether it's just more fingers in the same pie, or whether you really would create any additional funding there. I don't know what you think about that. I don't see any viable prospects for funding, frankly, to do what looks like a very good plan.
Well, and that's often the discussion point after my presentation. I am not a financial guy, so I can't tell you ABC, this is how we need to do it. What I can say is that we're going to all have a whole lot of motivation real quick here to find some way to do it because of what what we're going to face in trying to move around the city. And the Regional Transportation Authority has been brought up several times in presentations I've made recently in the discussion afterwards, as you have suggested. It's what you often see big regions doing. And yes, it's messy and it never works great, and they tend to go big and then they break it all up and they go small. And they go big and then they break it up and go small. So it's challenging to do it well. My only message is the crisis is coming. We can either mitigate it through some of the steps I've suggested, or we can say we don't know how to pay for it, so we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and we may get to points where the situation is worse than it could have been.
Well, you end up with LA. I mean, you know, LA, to get to the airport, it can take between an hour or 3 hours, depending on what happens on the freeway system, if you're going from Thousand Oaks or
I need to
Burbank or
tell you my
someplace like
secret
that.
backstreet arterial way to get to the airport. But let me just